For a long time I believed the dark was the natural state of things, and that warmth was a small, borrowed accident inside it. I believed this because I was raised by a man who lived as though it were true, and who spent his life giving the accident away. He was a human. I did not know then what that word would come to mean to the rest of the settled lanes. I knew only that he was large and slow-moving, and that his hands, which could have closed around my whole head, never once closed around anything of mine without asking first. His name was Tomas Halloran, and he ran a relay tender called the Greywake on the circuit my people came to call the Quiet Way, though he never called it anything but the Run. The run was 11 years long. He was most of the way into his second when he found me, which is to say he had been alone in the dark for the better part of 2 decades, talking to instruments and to the recorded voices of people who had long since stopped expecting an answer. I have his logs. I have read them more times than I can count. They are the most boring documents in the settled galaxy, and I would not trade them for a homeworld. 3,000 entries, and most of them say the same 9 things. Air nominal, water nominal, reactor within tolerance, hull pressure holding. Relay beacons 17 through 22 pinged and answered. Slept poorly, slept well, read. The man kept a record of his own sleep, the way other men keep a record of their fortunes. And for the same reason, because in the dark the small things are the only things, and a man who lets the small things go will not last. I have tried to imagine the day before he found me, and I cannot, because there was nothing in it. That is the truth of the run, nothing in it. He woke in a narrow bunk in a narrow ship moving very fast through a stretch of space so empty that the nearest star with a name was 4 years behind him and the nearest with a name ahead was 5 years on. He exercised. He ate a measured thing out of a sealed pouch. He checked the 9 things. He logged them. He read an old book on a cracked screen. He slept. The genius of the line, the company that owned the Greywake and owned Halloran's contract and owned, in the way of such companies, a good portion of Halloran himself, was that it had calculated to the gram exactly how much a man needed to survive 11 years alone and had provided exactly that and not 1 gram more. A ship for 1. Air for 1. Warmth, and this matters, this is the whole of it, warmth for 1. He found me on the 4,000 and some day of his contract. 1,100 days from the nearest port in either direction, when the Greywake's long range pinged a contact off his lane that should not have been there. His log for that day is longer than usual. I will not pretend I can give it to you in his words. He wrote plainly, and I have never been able to match it. But I know what it said, and I know what he did, because I came to know him better than I have ever known anyone, and a man's later years tell you his earlier hours. The contact was a pod, a survival shell, the kind a transport ejects when a transport is dying, built to hold a sleeping body and a thin reserve of air, and to broadcast a single repeating cry into the dark until something hears it or the reserve runs out. It had been broadcasting a long time. The transport it came from was the Unseen, a refugee hauler that had left the wars on the Rimward side, carrying more of my people than it was rated for. And the Unseen was not on any chart Halloran carried, because the Unseen had never reached anywhere that puts a ship on a chart. It had come apart somewhere in the empty middle, the way overloaded ships come apart, and it had thrown out what pods it had time to throw, and the dark had swallowed all of them but one. And that one, the Greywake's lane, happened, after years and years, to cross. A man who has been alone for 19 years and hears a voice will go toward the voice. That is not decency. That is hunger. The decency came after. Because when he matched velocity with the pod and brought it into the Greywake's small cargo lock and cracked the seal, and this took him most of a day, the matching and the closing, a tender is not built to chase things. What he found inside was not a sleeping adult colonist who could pull their own weight on the long run home. What he found was small. What he found was me. I was very young. I do not remember it. I have only what he told me much later. In the flat way he told me everything, sitting across the fold-down table with his big hands around a cup he was not drinking from. He said the pod's reserve was almost gone, and that I was breathing the last of it in the slow, shallow way of a thing that has nearly stopped. He said my eyes were open, and that they did not track him, which frightened him more than anything had frightened him in 19 years, because a thing whose eyes do not track is a thing already half gone. He said he stood in the cargo lock holding the pod open and did the arithmetic. I want you to understand the arithmetic, because everything that made him what he was lives inside it. The Greywake carried air for 11 years. He was a little under 5 years from being able to hand his contract off and breathe a planet's air again. A growing child, and he did not know yet what my people grew into, did not know how much I would eat or how fast would draw on that air, and on the water he reclaimed drop by drop, and on the food the line had counted to the gram, and on the reactor's slow, steady warmth that the line had set to keep exactly one body above the line where a body fails. There was no margin in any of it. The line had seen to that. Margin is waste, and waste is money, and a man alone needs no margin, only enough. The cold arithmetic, the line's arithmetic, the arithmetic printed in the contract he had signed with his own hand, was simple, and it was this. A contracted operator encountering distressed property or persons in the deep lanes was to log the encounter, broadcast a notice on the long band, and continue the run. He was not to divert. He was not to take aboard. The deep lanes were full of things that had died, and a tender that stopped for every dead thing would itself become one. The notice would be received in time by an office, and the office would file it, and that was the whole of what a man in the dark owed to a pod he could not save. He could have closed the pod and logged it. He told me this himself. He said it as a man says a thing he has made his peace with. He could have sealed the shell and entered the contact in the log, one survival pod, occupant non-viable, notice broadcast, run continued, and no one in any office anywhere would ever have said a word against him, because the arithmetic was sound, and the arithmetic was the lines, and the line was right that a man alone has nothing to spare. What he could not do, he said, was look at a thing whose eyes had stopped tracking and decide that it was non-viable while it was still breathing. That was the whole of his refusal, and he never dressed it up as anything more. The arithmetic said I was a loss. He had spent his life keeping records, and he knew a loss when he saw one. He simply would not write it down while I was still warm. So he took me out of the pod, and he carried me into the one heated cabin on a ship built for one. And he began the long work of paying for a thing the line had charged him nothing for, because the line did not believe it could be done. The first 100 days nearly killed us both. He had to learn me. I was not a human child, and he had nothing aboard that knew what I was. He did not know what I could eat, or how warm I needed to be kept, or why I made the sounds I made, or why I went still and gray at the edges in the ship's night, and what to do about it. He kept a log of me the way he kept a log of the 9 things. He wrote down everything I took and everything I refused and everything I did, and slowly, the way a careful man learns anything, he learned the shape of the thing he had taken on. He learned that I could take the ship's protein if he warmed it and thinned it, and that I could not take it cold. He learned that my people run colder than humans and need it, that the chill that would have killed a human child was the chill I had been born for, and this was a mercy, because warmth was the one thing the Greywake could least afford to give. He learned that the gray at my edges in the ship's night was not dying but sleeping, that my people fold down into a kind of low, slow rest that looks, to a human, exactly like fatting, and that the worst thing he could do was wake me out of it, though for the first dozen nights he woke me every time, certain each time that he was losing me, until he learned to sit beside the bunk instead and watch me breathe and let me be. I have thought a great deal about those dozen nights. A man who had taught himself across 19 years to need almost nothing, sitting awake beside a strange, small, alien thing he had no reason to keep, refusing to sleep until he was sure it would draw another breath. There is no arithmetic that produces that. There is no contract that requires it. It is simply what some humans do, and it took me most of my life to understand that it is not a small thing they do but the largest thing there is, and that they do it so quietly that the rest of the lanes mistook it, for a long time, for weakness. The margins tightened the way he had known they would. I grew, which is what a small thing does if you keep it warm and fed, and a growing thing draws more. The air scrubbers, sized for one, ran harder. He cut his own ration to widen mine and logged the cut without comment. The water reclaim, sized for one, fell behind, and he cut his own water and logged that too. He was not a large man by the time I was old enough to remember him clearly, though the logs say he had been. The logs from the early years describe a man who exercised an hour a day to keep his strength against the planet he was owed at the end of the run. The logs from the later years stopped describing the exercise. There was nothing left to spend on it. He spent it on me instead, gram by gram. And I did not know, because a child does not know, because he made very sure I did not know. Here is a thing I learned only from the logs, years after when I was grown and could read them with grown eyes. There came a day, somewhere in the long middle, when the Greywake developed a fault in the primary heating loop. A coil failed. The reactor still ran, still made its heat, but the means of moving that heat through the ship's one warm cabin began slowly to die. He could not fix it. He had no coil to replace it and no port within years to carry him to one. He could only manage it, route what warmth remained through a narrowing path, and watch the temperature in the cabin begin, by tenths of a degree across long weeks, to fall. He did the arithmetic again. He always did the arithmetic. I want you to know that he was never a man who did not see the cost. He saw it more clearly than anyone. He simply refused the conclusion. The failing loop could keep one cabin warm enough for one body, if that body was human and that cabin was small, and he sealed off everything else and lived in the cold himself. Or it could keep the same cabin warm enough for two, but only by drawing the temperature down to a place where a human would not last the run. He had learned by then that I ran cold. He had learned that my people are built for the chill that kills his. And so he made the arithmetic come out the only way it could be made to come out, and he gave me the warm cabin, and he sealed himself into the cold one, and he went on. The log entry for that day is 4 words long. I have it by heart. Moved my bunk forward. That is all. Moved my bunk forward. A man rearranging his death into a smaller room and recording it the way he recorded that the air was nominal, because to him it was the same kind of fact, and because he did not want, even in his own private record, to make it sound like more than the simple thing it was. I was a child. I knew none of this. I knew that the cabin I slept in was warm and that the man who tucked the wrap around me came in from somewhere that was not, that his hands when he touched my face were cold and got colder across the years, that he would warm them at the cabin's vent before he touched me so as not to wake me with the cold of himself. I thought that was just how he was. I thought cold hands were simply a fact of him, the way the great size of him was a fact, the way his slow voice was a fact. I did not understand that I was warm because he had decided to be cold. Children do not understand the price of the things that keep them. That is the mercy of being kept. He paid for my not understanding, and he counted the not understanding among the things he was buying, and he thought it cheap at the price. He taught me to read on the cracked screen with the old books. He taught me his language first, because it was the only one he had, and then together we worked out mine, or pieces of it, from the few words I had carried out of the pod, and we built between us a third thing that was neither, a language of two, full of words that meant nothing to anyone but us. He taught me the 9 things and let me log them in a clumsy hand, and made it a solemn business, the logging, so that I would learn that the small things are the only things and that a child who lets the small things go will not last. He was teaching me, I understand now, how to survive him. He knew he would not reach the end of the run. He had known it, I think, since the day the coil failed and he moved his bunk forward. He was using the years to put into me everything I would need to finish the run alone. The way a careful man, knowing the dark, leaves the next watch a full set of working instruments and a clear log. The last stretch of the quiet way is the worst of it, a long dead reach with no relay beacons and nothing to do but hold course and endure. And it was in that stretch that the gray wake began, finally, to fail in earnest. The reactor's tolerances slipped. The warmth he had been rationing to me thinned further. The food the line had counted to the gram for one man for 11 years had been stretched across two. For years it was never meant to feed. And it was running out. And he was the one who went without. Because I was small and growing, and he was old now and done growing, and had decided which of us the remaining grams were for. I remember the end of it, though I have spent a lifetime wishing I did not, because what I remember is so small against what it was. I remember that he grew quiet, and then quieter, and that the quiet was not the comfortable quiet of his ordinary days but a heavier thing, a settling. I remember that he moved slowly even for him. I remember that he spent a long time, near the end, teaching me the docking procedure for landfall, drilling me on it past all reason, his cold hand over my small one on the controls, again and again, until I could have done it asleep, until I could have done it gray at the edges and folded halfway down into the dark. I did not understand why it mattered so much that I, a child, should know how to bring a ship into a port that was still a year away, and that he would surely bring us into himself. I understand now. I remember the last log entry because I have it, because everyone has it now, because it was read into the record of 3 governments and is carved on a wall on a world I have stood before with my grown hands folded and my eyes doing the thing his never saw them learn to do, which is to weep. It is not a grand entry. He would have hated a grand entry. It says, "Air nominal for the one of us who needs it. She knows the run. Continue." He did not reach landfall. I did. I will not tell you the shape of how he went, because he would not have wanted it told as a spectacle, and because the whole of his life was the refusal to make a spectacle of a death, even when the death was a child's, and even when the child was a stranger, and even in the end, when the death he was managing so quietly was his own. He went the way he had lived, by arithmetic honestly done, and a conclusion honestly refused, keeping the warm cabin warm for the one of us built to grow and taking the cold for himself, because that was how the numbers came out, and he had never in his life cooked a number to spare himself a cost. I brought the Greywake into port a year later alone, a half-grown alien child at the controls of a dead man's ship, doing a docking procedure I had drilled 1,000 times with a cold hand over mine that was no longer there. The Port Authority's logs record the contact, a line relay tender overdue, hailing in a child's voice in a language no one recognized, requesting clearance in the careful phrases of a man none of them would ever meet. They thought it was a malfunction. They thought it was a ghost ship. In a way it was. He was all through it. He is all through me. The line tried, at first, to bill his estate for the variance. For the air I had breathed and the water I had drunk and the warmth I had been kept by, all of it drawn against a contract that allowed for one. The arithmetic, you understand, was sound. It was always sound. A small, careful office somewhere ran the numbers on what one human had given away across the dark and produced an invoice, because that is what the arithmetic produces, and they sent it, because that is what they had always done. It was the invoice in the end that undid them. Someone in that office, or someone the invoice passed through, read the 4 words, moved my bunk forward and could not file it, could not make it nominal. The logs got out. They went where logs go, and then they went everywhere. And the settled lanes, which had thought they knew what humans were, useful, dangerous, good in a fight, a young and reckless species best kept at arm's length, read the boring records of a boring man's 11 boring years and understood, all at once and all together, that they had not known the first thing about them. Because here is what my people had not known, and what the others had not known, and what I myself did not know until I was grown and read the logs with grown eyes. There is a thing some humans carry that does not appear in any survey of their strength or their reach or their appetite, a thing that does not show on any threat assessment, a thing the line's accountants could not find a column for. They will do the arithmetic every time, more honestly than you would. And then, having done it, having seen the cost laid out to the last gram, they will look at a small warm thing that the numbers say is a loss, and they will refuse to write it down, and they will pay the difference out of themselves quietly for years in the cold and call it nothing and mean it. He was not a great man. He would have been the first to say so in his flat way, around a cup he was not drinking from. He was a relay tender on a dead run who heard a voice in the dark and went toward it, which was hunger, and then stayed beside it, which was not. He kept a small thing alive across a distance that should have killed them both, by the simple method of deciding that he would go cold so that I would not, and doing it, and logging it nominal. I have a homeworld now. I have stood before the wall where his last 4 words are carved, on a world his people and mine share because of what his people turned out in the end to be. I have a name, which he gave me, and a language of 2 that no one else will ever speak, and a set of working instruments and a clear log, because that is what a careful man leaves the next watch. And I have the arithmetic. I do it still every day the honest way he taught me, seeing the cost clearly, all of it to the last gram. And then, every day, I refuse the conclusion. It is the only thing of his I know how to pass on. I am told it is the largest thing there is.